Okay, so just to summarize everything we talked about this morning. Remember that all cells in any one organism, each of those cells, they all have the same genes. But as time goes on, as development happens, what changes, what makes a different type of cell is how those genes are acted upon, how the environment acts on those genes and turns some genes on and some genes off.
Rigzi yawa dinzu ku nanglo ne ane kashi ane nambangu du kyunye lega chinye kashi ane lega maji nye cha du yores kashi lega chinye da kashi lega maji wa cha be ku gyumsen le tene ane chabung dinzu khale khar cha du yores la bim bena duste du sambala ane manda wa cha du yores.
And when time goes on and the environment changes, in different cells, there's different gene expression. Another way to say gene expression is to say gene is on. Another way to say the gene is on is that gene is making RNA and proteins. So all of these are another way of saying the same thing.
Tuzun dorim shindu kuryun yurgin chigres tamundu kuryun yurgin chidu sambala rigze dunzu khar chigres lamim bana rigze namgyur tanadi ane tamunsu manda cha dures. Rigze namgyur ten sidu sambala ane nambangur sidu sambala khala yurs lamim bana dig nanglo rigze mangu yewe nanglo ne rigze khari ane kunzu keje shebena on ladu sambala ya par sha gyuresha lega chinye resha ane rigze lega chinye resha ladu khala yurs lamina rigze dig ane aren su du mindu rigze dig ane tigar su du mindu disig yores.
Okay, and then when you have different genes on and different gene expression, different proteins, the result is you get different types of cells.
Chata chabung nanglo rigze yawa chikpa imbe na yang chabung dinzu nanglo rigze khashi ane lega chi maje namangu kyur majur ki thone konzu nanglo la RNA da ane tigar mandawa cha du res chabung nanglo la RNA da tigar mandawa cha du zambala ane chabung dinzu ane penzu ane mandawa cha yores chenjur cha du yores.
Okay. So now we want to do an exercise with you guys to get you to review and think about what we've been talking about so far.
Tanda badu mazu karshi shigiyo denzu kutola ta charjung kutsudula ane gela chinan sula legach tigis.
So we're going to do a debate.
And
we're going to assign you a role in the debate, and we're going to divide you into small groups. And the small groups are going to come up with evidence, spend some time thinking, come up with evidence for your side of the debate. And then the other side is going to come up with evidence for their side of the debate, and then we'll have the debate.
Chazada tamungila ane ruha susu legende digins. Chaza legende wa dig tola ane ruha nangla ane kharchi guyos lamin bana susu jushi khari ma dig ane ta pangda sigine rubji khari mi kola ane tamungila thudur chi juins thudur chi sabe jela ane ruha pinjin phala ayos ni.
So side A of the debate, all you guys on that side of the room, your groups are going to be considering this hypothesis, this statement, gathering evidence to support this statement. and everybody on this side of the room is going to be making this argument.
Sanper se dik nanglola development sigiyo sarki sigin sarper se dik nanglola ke cheshu yuding the khare islami bana sumbu de dengi ki thabung den zo resta sarper ki nanglola ke cheshu di ya nanglola sigiyo ne sarper la ane ke cheshu di sumbu de dengi ki thabung den zo res tai kharan so khare islami bana sarper se dik nanglola ke cheshu di khare islami bana shi simba da Shi shimbeke ane thabung den zo res what is all.
Okay, so we're going to work on this, think about this for a few minutes. Everybody on this side in groups of 3 or 4, everybody on this side in groups of 3 or 4. You're saying living, you're saying dying. And then we'll have one debate, but different groups, different people can join the debate, and we'll have some judges, and the judges will decide who wins.
Ta dir khare islami bana gela kiransu gyushi dirdar. Ina ya kiransu ruhajik naglol mi shis dero chis chisum kiransu shidu sin dira kiransu ya tudu sin dira ma khallo ina kiransu gyushi ranja kiransu naglol ni shis je ane chodur chero chis ane jela ane dinen ruhajik da dinen ruhaj nyamdu tujuyi ane pela timbunji shegins ta chunich timbudik timda jure sutowi da sutu shori yeah mi shis dero chida.
Okay, so the idea of this exercise is to review evidence and think through what we've been talking about.
Also, that these on Kargeja Shigu Yor Islami Bena, Tandabad the Shesimbikita, Nizu Dinzu told Shisha Shigu Yor Sonza, Tandabad the Shisha looks into Jargon Chadu Yor Das, Jargon Tewa Shigures.
Okay, the way this is going to work is we're going to have 4 judges.
Kelato, Chazata Lanzu de Namdu Lanzu, Sorbon Siga, Sorbon, Tarjuchi, Sorbon and Hawe, Timbusum, Chius de la Ketangis.
So the 2 professors, Pantelis and I will be judges, and then we're going to have a judge from each side of the aisle.
Chaza Gela Kurani, De Gala, Ane, Dando, Denijik, Mini Ketangis.
So you're going to be one judge here.
Gelajik, Gelasho shows.
And Lobsang, another judge. Okay. So we're going to debate for a while, and at the end of I'll try and keep track of some evidence, some points up on the board.
Gelato de
this side, this side.
Dichola, Kirazuki, ane evidence lana, Panda, Drupje. Kargar Guido, they told you the two tickety. The honor they told the Zuki and the Kachimbu in Rabki and the Panda the Rubji Kardu, they'll talk in thus.
And then at the end, the judges will decide who wins.
To the Dijala and Tanda Sorbonsu touch you this Paju Midi.
Okay, you can start whenever you're ready and however you like.
Agelaso Kirani touches Tamjet Dinis Chigim that Zoba Teoguni, Zobani Swim touches. Ani harsim beta su lengyani chingbe su tiwadani chingbe timbuni manzo lengyani chingba manzo leje da timbu so he's saying that we will do the defending part. Then they are saying that he is a biased judge.
Of course, I figured that out. So they can go for a while and then they can switch later, right?
Again, so this is the majalas. And Kiran to Tamja Dinin, they may jail Kiran to the Rairest, Pazuniga Chejuilas. And Ling is the Yuchiro. And yeah, and Kimzu Ling at that. Kimzu Teotangira, Teotangi, the meeting the Guzura, Tamunyam do Humara, meeting the Guzura, Shamba watching the details.
그래서 아니 차비가 차비를 아니 쌤만의 시험 아니 사비를 개체가 요소라 아 개체가 뭐야 개체야 진짜 가세요 개체가 진짜 가자
나 정보 때는 가르쳤어. 자꾸 나 토마 가르쳤으나 그 담보 누가 내가 사다 했어요. 이나 나 이제 자본들이 좋아하는 안들이 거의 들이 아니 가르쳤으나 소파 문제가 들이 자꾸 같이
야야 야 마사이 메스 자 지금 저 내가 믿는 차
Okay. So we want to switch who the defendant is.
빼하고 둘러서 저 인간 고갑 되길래 딱 균도 랭갱이다. 그래서 저 뒤에다.
배치장으로 와. 아까 좀 무서워요. 제대 증거도 맞죠 무서운데다. 무서운데 제대 증거보다 맞죠 무서운데 이봐지. 다 맞죠 무서운데 안에 가래 잡배 잡아라. 맞죠 미치들라 안에 가래 나자 슈잡다. 나자 슈잡다. 아 됐습니다. 나도 생각이 마시바이다. 나자 슈게도 마시바이다. 맞죠 송가시기요. 아 송가디 나눠라. 싱게도 개차리다. 싱게도 개차리.
Very small. We take an example. So say there's three people and one of them is dying with a very if we didn't die, the other two won't be able to live. So that means one who has the disease or the one who is dying has the more ability to decide the future. So that's why it says that 결혼한 것도 팀분이 팀다 주기 있어. 결혼하니 삼두시 주기 일었어.
나랑이 단다디 다 로스원은 돈 시기라. 집어지게 러르자. 가서는 딱할 텐디 러르자. 가서는 고주이라나 저봉 시에 개침보레스. 시에 개침보 좀제 가서는 안 저봉 숨벌 핀베치드레스라. 아니 니저 가르스나 저번 선보드 개침보레스 가르스나 아니 가서 다 저번 개빌체다 아니 니버 트에다 촉도 야보 영향 주더레스 근데도 인딘디 금지기 이제라 줌진 가가르모도 줌진 대응을 도도라 집어지게 보고도 가서 직시와라 직된 것도 시와데 수요치 들으셨나 선보치 들으셔 선보데 수요 된데는 시와된도 줌진 된다 저와단나 가다 저와단다 랭겹단 개발 가가르모도 대응을 집어넣으셨어.
Dying and living are kind of dependent on each other. So if you remove one, then you are automatically removing the other part. So that means because of that, it's just one idea that you can say from different points of view. But in terms of resisting and Vedish, I think that they both did equally well.
지단이가 다 리포트하면서 리뷰 트레이닝을 하러 지단 내가 주시 가르치는 살벨을 들어. 저 살벨라 숨바디 기치기를 그래 치워디 기치기를 하러. 리뷰 트레이닝은 지단이가 내가 심부르도 기치중 피지고로 차디고 dostan. 다지다 리뷰 트레이닝 따로 다스 당당다고 상마. 겨지디 감적으로. 그래서 현석이 가르치기는 진짜 다 초딩으로. 아니. 살벨이 다니 숨바디 기치다 인도 숨바든 살벨이 이와치도 문도. 로. 숨바든 살배 여원 마싱이 도시도 다스 당당당 랭게 당당 라유당이 힘나가 치고 그러 세대 갱 된 다스다로 아래 치워디 계신 머리 많이 받아 아니 사벨라 임바다 숨바디 계시 다스다는 당도 아래 지난 딘디 치디 좀 봐. 사벨다 숨만이 남자야 우시 동문도스. 아래 지난다 두스 까나리다 어디 되리셔다.
So even though in terms of the reasoning and logical kind of arguments, they equally did well. But this when they ask the questions, they only focus on the living and the dying part, and they didn't focus on the development part. But when it's their turn to ask the questions, they not only talk about the differences or the importance of living and dying, but they also talk about it in the context of development. So that's why I think this group won the argument.
Okay, thank you to the judges. So I think that clearly everybody, I agree with the judges, we agree with the judges that biologically, really it's hard to argue either one is more important. They both seem to be equally important.
Tadi timbu denzu lasos ani nganzu keling use dikhares lavim bena kindeng kin rodang thon shevim bena ani dikechere da dikechere mares na tha chutwe yo mares achig mena ani shembad meo chadures.
And that's really the point here. I think if you ask most biologists or most scientists in the West, they wouldn't think so much about the death. They would focus on the living. And I think that what Buddhism brings and what our conversations bring is a realization that living and dying are just as important to living.
Jesa inaya da nubjo ki chengen sirig ba pechewal kiransu ki keja tv bena kunzu khadi bena ane soya da sone chinge ki thabung de zu kol she dewa ma do shia da ane shi simbi ki thabung de zu kol ane shi mares to na shi mares jesa da dinde do so do da nangju da dinde ngaju dewa cha yindu sambala ane sumba se di kechim bu yimba nangshi ane shia di kechim bu yimba di tol ane samu tang tang le ya denzo ane le yungu yores ko gabra gi yores.
But as I think our bias, and as Pantelis points out, this side had a harder argument to make. It's more challenging to argue for death because we don't normally think of it as part of life. But I agree that they did a very good job, and in terms of argument, I give a slight edge to this group, so they won the argument.
Jesa da jina ane namgyu imbe na ngaju thaman de se peche wa de ane sombu yin da sombu yin ken de zu ko le she de yo songza ane shi simba da shinge de zu ko le shi da shi ge ma res jesa khadu imbe na choba choy kapsla ane di cho de la ane ma she de yo kimse ma ko yo di cho la ane kimse me wa da she nyuma di yo cha de yo res ina da dus ta du example cho nyinge ge ane ke ja yak mo she sons jesa ta ko jikba she wi imbe na ko namgyu she dis nyung yo we kimse de ne ane kondu to ba kondu tang ge das.
I'm really impressed by your debate. I mean, it's really hard to probably be in a debate able with all the movements that are going on, you know, trying to understand each other. So that is really impressive.
Jesa da kiranzu ge da di choba chona dus te di sambal di impressive di sambal da ngazu nawan ro da chi se joro ta de nawan ro shush dus ane choba chobe kapsla ane chi phaksa lo ya da chomgya gya da mangbu shush do di jegi jegi thandu ane phajo ke je shin chi sta ke khoda tere chi ge ro di pe hang sa ya reshes kani chi
Ari told me, oh, here are the Greek and Italians when they debate. And I said, no, these guys are better than the Greek and Italians.
Jesa da ge ari khoran khalas la be da o kuntu choba choya khewo yores kuntu choba choya de ngema da nobjo na choba chonya da dine che de ma chi Greek ki mi da Italy la kunzu lungbe mi ro ta kunzu lungbe mi do yores la la sos de ge ina nge marshals kunzu Greek da Italy ki mi le choba ya chu dus la is.
And one last thing, I was really impressed by the clapping.
Tega na shi de la ko da be de pe manda shu dus ta.
Everybody had a different clapping, but I think if we're gonna judge by clapping, there is one winner for me on the clapping.
chena an dus lagwa dabdu sampal sangma an this manda dabgu dus ta lagba dabdang to ne an chik su ya chung su lan tha chwe wim bena ngatim tha chu ni dina del ta chik yakshu chik dus
And he is the winner for me.
yakshu khora re
Okay, so before we get to questions to finish up the morning, I want to talk about one other area of development that typically we have not addressed in the West very well.
chesa da dhanda shoge ke an so ding de ju madi ngol thewa da dine ju madi ngol an thanda sanber ko la juji shimbaji she ayus jushi de khares la bim bena ya nobjo la shida thona maji sa ki ene jushi chik cha de gyores.
So if you were at the symposium in December, Dr. Gilbert brought up some of these ideas, and that is the idea that one species cannot develop or evolve on its own, but that species evolve and develop together. Different species work together. So as humans, for example, we're not just developing with human cells, but we're actually developing and require other species to develop with us.
chesa da de khasang ma chinda chungni nga zu chongdu kapsla kunyam do ane thanda gen gilbert se koran ki tsenek badi keja she yor keja nanglo la nezu di kol she yor es chesa di khares la bim bena ane nga zu namgi ane chinding rik chida ba chik ane sanper chungwe kapsla ane koran chikbu ane rik chida ba di chikbu ane sanper che thugre besla na che thug mares nga zu mi do shimbena mi ane yabu chin sanper chewala mi la ane simje rik shamba da tsing da rik shamba mangu shuji ten di gugduas.
These are relatively new ideas in science because we didn't have the tools or the understanding or the knowledge until probably the last 10 or 20 years to begin to appreciate just how important so-called co-evolution and co-development are.
chesa da di ane ta nobjo sinrik nanglo la ane thona shira majung ya di ane ta lagbar du ane ta lochu ni shu ngol thona shira yamares chesa di me goya di ane di kol ne zu shenya da shingyu yamare ne zu ma shenya di ane shenda me gyumzen res ta debe lochu ni shu di nanglo thanda ngzo samlo sawaji khale gyors la bena ko evolution na ngzo pherim sig yo pengyur sig yo ko la du sambal nyamdu simje shemba da nyamdu ane pengyur chungdi ya development la du sambal sanfer la yo dila ane ko la du sambal la nyamdu ane simje shenda nyamdu ane chempel chia da sanfer chia ki samju sawali gyores.
So we'll talk about one or two examples. First off, that there are certain kinds of bacteria that we require as humans to develop properly. Actually, all animals require some bacteria.
Pesha jana ngazo mi ine re mi mai be simje pe thangmal khari ores la mi be na ane koran so wala ane sanfer che wala ane koran ki sugu nanglo la ane thanda bacteria thambu mangu shush thasing mangu shush gu yores.
So we rely on the bacteria to be able to develop, to have embryonic development. We rely on bacteria now as adult human beings. And this is true of humans and probably all animals.
chesa da ngazo ane thanda thambul la ane nge de ya ten de ya di ngazo ame ko khokwa na yebe ge ngene ki kap ne che thanda ngazo ane chembu chacha ki phardula ane ngazo sanfer yagu ji yong la ane thanda thambu du zul ten de wo gu yo wa thambu du zul te di ge wa cha ge res.
In return, the animals or the humans provide resources and safe space for the bacteria. So it's a shared interdependence.
대한민국 ngazul pentu yo na shi mida ane simjen dinzu ki ane thambu dinzu pha khar pentu yoreslana kunzu desert ti yores ngazo kunzu khala ti yores ngazo cheda dela de sambala penju ene chikmin chikro cheche ne di yordas.
If my hypothesis to you was that we require bacteria for development, that without bacteria we wouldn't develop properly, could you think of an experiment to test that hypothesis?
nganzu cheba chibi mena chosha sigyo cheba di khare slavin bena ane nganzu midinzu ane sarpel yagoji yongala ane thambu gure se di ane cheba imbena cheba de re du mindu tayala ane tagje khandes chigo sares tagje samudang to service we can kill all the bacteria and see.
Yeah, very
what's
good.
happened.
So this is the kind of experiment you wouldn't want to do with humans ethically, but you could do it with mice. So what people have done with mice is make sure there are no bacteria in the mother and make sure there's no bacteria in their living environment. And then you let the mother have for her babies or her pups with no bacteria. And you say, what happens? Do they develop? Do they develop well? What's wrong with them?
Res Koran lawan shi dine che yores ta dine dinga zu midang chingma ros anzu taji khawa shigla na tisi nan chi res a tisi amay nanglo la ame supu ta kokpa nanglo la ane bu che mewa se dijela ane tisi de la ane bu chaju ane dejena bu de salon khandes chingudu amad salon khandes chigudu an tai res.
And it turns out that the difference between normal babies that grow up with bacteria and babies that don't have bacteria are dramatic differences.
Chesa da tambu yose ki khori nanglo la salon chini ki ane puda tisi puda ane tambu mengi ki khori nanglo la ane salon chibi tisi puni phala durdu zambala chewa di dramatic la du zambala namsi chewa yores ta ha sa chewa yores.
The baby mice that have never seen bacteria, their organs are not fully developed. They have very poor to no immune systems.
Chesa da tanda tambu mesi khori nanglo sar dini pu du zo kunzu wangbo du zo ta changa yo mares. Tan organs le zambala chida na ningal ngazo yorwa ngbo tenzo changmo majungwa tigana shi ngongo mala lega yapo che matuni dinde chadi yores.
And they die young.
tigana shi chunju gapsne ani gumzen tenzo tene shi du yores.
So it's not just that the bacteria are important for the development of the mice, and it turns out for us, but they're necessary. Without the bacteria, you get a very sick organism that doesn't survive.
Chesa da dila du zambala chambu tenzo ngazo mida simje tenzo la ke chembu za maimba inji miji gonye chadi yores. Mena ani kera ani chunju gosne ani shi du dinde chadi yores. Swentu mares.
So when we think about how this must have evolved, you can imagine that bacteria have always been in our environment, have always been in human environments. And at some point, the bacteria, during evolutionary time, the bacteria starts affecting the organism, and the organism starts affecting the bacteria so deeply that they become entirely dependent on each other from the moment of fertilization to the moment of death.
Chesa da dila du zambala di kharting ko yoros tamina ngazo draw miss ya de chungani cheche ngazo chungsi khuriu nanglo la chambu zo yo dig yowa. Chesa tigana shi ane ngazo dos cheche ane sanper ki yurim ki nanglo la ane ngazo pha to ane chigla chig temba chamai ba ane thama ane chig mena ane shemba to so madu ya ki dinde ke ane ta nedan yo dewa din thong tu res.
So we know, for example, that at a certain point in a human mother's pregnancy, she starts secreting certain hormones that are important for the development of the embryo, and at the same time they're important to create an environment for certain species of bacteria to thrive and other species to not thrive. And probably, so the implication is that the environment is good for certain species that help the embryo develop.
Chesa da ame ngela ane ngedum yo kapsula ane ngazuk suku nanglo hormone dinde lugres hormone lana shirku ze dinde rig chik mingi ba teza denzu cheda ba re lo yungdu zambala di khar sigres lavi bena ngazu suku nanglo yebe ke ane thambu rig mangbo yoro rig mangbo nanglo ne ane pul khoya ki ane thambu rig denzu ane ne thobya da nonyi ki thambu rig denzu ane mewa soya ki ane dinde kla che tu yores.
For example, there's one species of bacterium that secretes a signal, because remember, bacteria are just cells like all other cells. That secretes a signal for the very young intestinal cells. And that signal from the bacterium causes the intestinal cells to start making blood vessels so that the intestines can then communicate with the rest of the growing embryo. Right? So here we have a bacterial signal that turns on a human intestinal signal so that the intestines can mature and grow blood vessels.
The bacteria lives in baby's intestine?
So the bacteria are present in the developing organism, right? So the mother makes the environment good for those bacteria. Those bacteria make a signal that tells the human developing stomach, intestine to secrete a signal so that they can develop further.
So that ama kharchiris lavim bena dinde ane zeloche ane bu gonye dezo de thumye bu mogonye dezo madinye swerwa 제가 모든 리지 가르치기로서 디 나로 지라바 빼샤는 부지기 아니 코란게 제지 로드 잠발라 부디 규메 나로라 아니 당봉이라 아니 탁사여 말이스 아니 부디기 아니 제그 다지 땅네 아니 신네 아니 부디 규메 나로라 차도서여 탁사여 차기요레스.
And that signal also helps the good bacteria because that signal also kills competing bacteria for the good bacteria. So it's helping the good bacteria help us and helping the good bacteria be stronger because that signal, in addition to growing blood vessels from the intestines, also kills bad bacteria.
대한시다 아메기 당봉년에 제들로 샤와디게 아니 세 마투미키 아니 부두자들이 단도 부심바들이 하되나 아니 부든조 수시기라나 단다 펜도 예베 첨부든조 시기레스 제자 첨부든조 레가니요레스 아니 첨부디 야고 초토비안 쿠리우디 아마디 소여서 제가 초사회 제로 그 가르치려나 부기 규막 나로라 착사 제주야 대한시 디 나로라 치로네 단지네 세 마투미키 부시 두자 심바들이 레되나 든조 아니 세가 줘야 레가니 든조 세 레가니 치기레스.
This kind of interdependent cooperation between bacteria and humans happen there's many examples and we keep discovering more that happen all the way through human development and they continue happening now in us and you.
제가 든조 단지 텐들다 텐중 아니 든데스 란 타니 베주 체도 제가 디 카르스 라주 삼발라 아니 간조 다 아니 단다 첨부 든조 아니 냐마네 체체 두 단다 봐도 아니 찍을 찍 땡지 냠도 아니 중디기요 제가 든데게 아니 제와데 단다이나 네디요 아 든데 샤디요레스.
So obviously bacteria help us develop food because there's a lot of bacteria in our stomach that help us develop food, but it goes much deeper than that.
제가 다 간조 그 수국 규모 든조 나로라 아니 첨부 망쇼여로 망부 쇼여로 든조기 아니 지금 간조 칼란주야 다지 레가 망부 치기여데 딜 디자마임바 딜 팅사베타 단지 샤오나시 아니 레가 망부 쇼 치디기요레스.
There actually seems to be a lot of communication. This is a new area, but a lot of communication between the brain and bacteria.
그래서 규마다 안에 규메나 되니 부든조자 마임바 부든조다 간조 레바니 팔이야 콘조 깨제시기요다스. 페레스타.
Yeah, so we know, for example, that in certain mental illnesses like autism and depression, the microbiome, the bacteria that live in those people changes and is very different than in people that don't have those illnesses.
디가조 간데신 하고 요르슬라빈베나 오티즘 시드sambal라 야 this
This is called
the
community of bacteria inside of us that live with us are called the microbiome.
나자스도 디지제 디가나시 아니 이묵 나자스에 아니 베데 셈시 우무디에 나자 나도야 도자 김제메와 김제 연다 나자 마로와 김제 메제 아니 탄도 아니 베데 셈 이무치 데드니 나자 든조 유니 미든조 규메 나로라 부유니 든조다 미탕탕이니 든조 규메 나로 부든조 땡도 잠발라 부고나 로가 차루 요레스.
So it's strange to think about that bacteria are affecting our mood and how we feel, but this seems to be the case.
제가 those status sambal라 아니 수분나로 이거 그 첨부 든조기 만주 셈기 네밥다 아니 이 당가시기는 데들라 아니 체버 지기요다 세디 얌셈부도 요르데니메나 얌세나마세나 모요니즈 디니 차디요레스다.
Yeah, it's interesting. We don't fully understand this, but here's an example of an experiment that shows this to be the case.
제가 덴데 임바데 티가스 랍샤 마임바 아니 코 타제 클람는 모트데요 요다 타제 직라나스.
So if you take a monkey and a mother monkey and her baby monkey, if you take the mother away, of course the baby gets very sad and depressed.
제가 타제 나로 키나 피우 아마직다 부지오체 코니 춘주가스나 카테샤나 카테 김젠데네 아니 부드베 심바키우 미고 차루요레스.
And if you look at the microbiome of the baby monkey, when you take mom away, there's a certain kind of bacteria called lactobacillus, and that amount of bacteria in the gut of that baby goes way down when you take mom away.
아마 다 카테도도 sambal라 부든조 유메 나로 게베케 첨부 나로네 첨부 리직 밍 칼레르슬라비나 lactobacillus 라기요레스 제가 lactobacillus 기 당가디 아니 홉 칼마 히우디 차루요레스 뉴 로샤기요레스.
When the baby goes back to another group of monkeys and gets happy again, the level of lactobacillus goes up in that baby's stomach.
그러나시 덴데 부춘주디 아마다 비우심바 요새 그 초박 나로 팔레소나 그 규만 나로 게베케 lactobacillus 든조 야 마운 파리용구요레스.
And in fact, in some experiments like this, you could just add this bacteria artificially back to the depressed baby, and the baby feels better again.
Tianashi any dindeki any tanda piudi sampakyo dini piudi zu khobo nanglola bud khabdu palu shana ani ko thaji nyob de kyo di nyob sandu yores nawa thandu yores ta semki du yores.
So it seems that bacteria are part of a mind-body connection that we still don't fully understand, but clearly something is going on.
Chesa dinzu thone nganzo kharago la na luda semki jewe ki phala ani bacteria thambu dinzu ki ani lega chigiyo dinesh chadi yores.
So I'll give one more example of this, just to show this is true for all animals.
Chesa da di ani simje chada ba chik zamai ba simje sangma la ani nedan de imba ani peji shana.
So when I was reading about Dr. Gilbert's work in coevolution and co-development, I thought to myself, I wonder if slime mold also cooperate with bacteria in development.
Chesa da Gilbert korang ki thep dinzu nanglo la ani thanda co-evolution la sambala nyamdu ani pengur da ani nyamdu sarfer niya dinzu ko la du slow di du sambala ni ki kharsam slavim bena oh slime mold se simje del imbena ani ko thambu nyamdu la ani dewa cheche ani dinde phasu ani lega chigi na samsons.
So it turns out that they do. It turns out that some slime mold, when they're running low on food, when there's low amount of bacteria, they don't eat all the bacteria. Some cells they call farming cells. Some cells called farming cells, they store some bacteria and they keep them and carry them into the slug so that later on, after the spores form and they're dispersed, they already are carrying some food with them so they can start with some food. So they actually carry some bacteria as food into the slug and into the fruiting body to use in the next generation. They call them farming cells.
Dinde konzo ke chigi dus konzo khar chigi lana konzo slime mold dinzu ki thabun dinzu khar sagi yala na ani thasing da thambula dinzu sagi bacteria sagi yo cheza da bacteria nyu zo la model konzo khashi khar chigi dus la konzo ta su ro chan slak cha ro di chag du zambala ani khalal thama ta ha dewa dinzu masa wache ani nyar che nyamdu ki du dus ki je ko du la na slak la dina cha ru do ki an juma slak nang lo yu go cha de khar cha lo na thanda swenche la ni an jela di an sabeng ngon gyu do sabeng ngon gyu ka la khonang yama ki de gyo khala thambu du nyamdu ki che an drug dus an jela swen cha ka sim be na ko thando an khala khashi ha de gyo dine cha ru yo res.
So you might say, well, what do the bacteria get out of this? How do the bacteria benefit, right?
Oh, kuni do see example ane bacteria ko kepsan khandish ragyunas urim dinalon some sigres.
So they did some more experiments in the last year or two, and they found out that these bacteria actually infect the slime mold and cause the slime mold to carry them and become farmer cells and carry them to the next generation. That way, if you think about it, now those bacteria can spread. After those spores spread in the next generation, they're carrying those bacteria with them. So it's a benefit to those bacteria to be carried on to the next generation, and it's a benefit to the slime mold because now they're carrying food that they can use in the next generation.
Chesa dos ta du sambala bacteria de zo imbe na ya ane kepsa mewa maimba koran su che du nyer che ane thanda pegal jarga du yo jawi imbe na kharchil khonzo ngazo buda didin jadu sam ngazo nyenga ta lagyo in fact like do khonzo di che ane di che imbe na gyoma sunche din zu nyamdo le che ane sunche din zu ki ane kerab chimal ma do turo bacteria koran din nyamdo kharche tu yoroslam imbe na ane kerab chimal do che ane sanbe che ya tabu mount regun chiman ki ane khokabra yores.
So this idea, this area of interdependent development, interdependent evolution is pretty new, and we didn't really appreciate it until now, how dependent we are on other organisms just to develop, reproduce, and stay living. So this is probably true of all organisms. We just haven't figured it out yet, how it works in all these other organisms.
Nyamdu ane pengu doya da ane penju nyamje ko thone ane tanda ane sanpe doya chesa da dela ane tenjung da ane tendril land den thanye ta do chesa da dinde khar ta na ma dana ane jende de sama nganzu ane thangbongel ane pu cha dine sanpe doya thama ne gyurim sama nanglo la ane simje shimba la khadu yembe na ane nyam do to dig yo simje shimba da den ma do so so ranga wa chi ane so tu me wa de zo ane ha ku yung yo resta ja sa dila du samba la tanda seo khazus changmi la ma de be ane simje de simje yo wa changma ta jende yin ba changma ane jigl jigden to no yung dig yo cha yo res.
Okay, so let's take some questions about this or anything else we've talked about today.
자 단다 시심바 디크네 주콜이 이나레 디마임베 주시 심바 카리에나 단다 테와 땅에 주주 띵이스 고제 비주다 아마 카테 갑슬라 안에 심바 마조 체체 남규는시 데드니 비주디네 용규여베스 용규여나 안에 군주가 나로 코파 나로 여베케 안에 부두도 가르치기여레 물 부그네단 겨두여레 요마레스 저들다. So when you separate monkey babies from the mother, is it always the case that the babies become depressed and sick? Do you find some situations where babies act like normal? And if they act like normal, what about the lactobacillus present in their stomach? Do they see any changes?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there's always variability for any complex trait in a population.
다 당불스기가 딘데직 낭로라 안에 딘데 기타 고뇽부 임베케 체조 칸데 심비나 트릿 안에 디 낭론코 안에 체버그차 조르주스기가 원즈 베리블 딘데 요디기어레스 만다와차 디스티스 용디기어레스.
Even for our seeds to grow in the lab, that's why we measure many seeds, because we know that some are going to grow a lot, some are going to grow a little. There's always variability.
배전 가서 가산 사변 담샤교 딘주 나로는 사변 카시 링부지도 카시 야고지민도 제자 델라 삼바 디 나로라 망고타 고야 고라 안에 디 나로라 안에 만다와차 요베 김센딘 타브르바스.
So yes, my guess is there's variability from one baby to another, but in general, this pattern, the more depressed they are, the less lactobacillus they have, and the less lactobacillus, and vice versa, right? So in general, the pattern holds.
제가 다 부든서 임베나 안에 그 가져스티게 안에 이목 기체데 토 요레 말했어야 돼 나조 요레스 제가 가리 이메일 마되바 안에 그 아마다 카테 루두 잠발라 코베 낭로키 안에 렉토베실러스 당가 뉴 루두 잠발라 거기 이목이 안에 로디 슈크처처제데야 렉토베실러스 당가 가지 뉴 요비메나 망 요비메나 티주스키 안에 이목이 안에 단 나자디 안에 슈크충어 요 딘데 요디 안에 코 교요 말했어.